You wouldn't understand. This is something the family needs to decide." She said it gently, almost kindly, as if she was protecting me from information I wasn't capable of handling. The kettle clicked off behind me. Steam fogged the kitchen window. On the table, 3 envelopes lay unopened. An electricity bill, a loan reminder, a medical invoice with my name already printed at the bottom. My phone buzzed once. A family group chat. Messages were flying in, plans, jokes, decisions. I wasn't in it. I stood there for a moment, holding a mug I no longer wanted, listening to voices from the living room, my name mentioned, then lowered, then laughed away. I did not argue. I did not ask why. I didn't say, "But I paid for this." I didn't say, "That decision affects me." I simply nodded, because in that exact moment, something very quiet settled in my chest. This wasn't about misunderstanding. This wasn't about culture. This wasn't about me being sensitive. This was about position. They had decided where I stood, and they had done it without needing my agreement. I realized then how often I had been present only when money was needed, how quickly my voice disappeared once the transfer went through, how easily they spoke around me, not to me. The kettle was still warm, the bills were still unpaid, and the group chat kept moving without me. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was clear that if I was only useful as the one who paid, then I did not need to stay where my presence was optional. Clear that if my role could be reduced so quietly, it could also be withdrawn just as quietly. So I placed the mug down. I picked up the top envelope, and for the first time since I married into that family, I stopped trying to belong. If you're listening to this and something in your chest just tightened, comment number 1 below. Stay with me, because this story does not get louder. It gets colder. I did not grow up struggling with money, but I also did not grow up careless with it. In my family, money was treated like responsibility, not power. You used it quietly. You fixed what needed fixing. You did not talk about it unless there was a problem. That was how I was raised, so when I met Ethan, none of that felt important. He was kind. He listened. He did not ask questions about my background. He did not make jokes about where I came from. He treated me like a person first, and that mattered more to me than anything else. His family was different from mine. Smaller house, tighter budget, more noise, more opinions. But there was warmth there. At least that is what I thought. His mother talked often about values, about not living beyond your means, about how money could ruin families if you let it. I admired that. I really did. After we married, the differences became clearer, not in arguments, in small, practical moments. A roof that needed repairing, a medical bill that arrived unexpectedly, a loan that was close to default. I helped, not because I was asked, but because it felt natural. When you have the ability to prevent stress, you do it. That is what I believed. At first there was gratitude, long messages, careful thanks, promises that it was temporary. Then it became quieter. The next bill came, then another. Then another. No one said thank you anymore. No one checked if it was still comfortable for me. It was simply assumed. When Ethan's sister divorced, everything escalated. She was emotional, unstable, afraid. The family gathered around her, discussed options, lowered their voices when I entered the room. I offered to buy her a flat, a temporary place, somewhere safe while she rebuilt her life. I thought it was generous. I thought it was kind. They called me thoughtful, sensible, supportive. But even then, something shifted. Decisions about the flat were made without me. Who would live there? How long? What would happen later? Whenever I asked a question, I was met with the same phrase. You wouldn't understand. They said it softly, almost apologetically, as if I was too privileged to grasp real life, as if my money somehow disqualified me from having a voice. I started noticing patterns. I was included when payments were discussed. excluded when decisions were made. I was trusted to transfer funds, but not trusted with information. The family spoke about unity, about loyalty, about doing what was right. Yet somehow, that always meant doing what suited them. I told myself I was being sensitive, that this was normal, that families worked differently. I adjusted. I stayed quiet. I continued to help because I believed generosity would eventually be respected, because I believed love balanced things out. What I did not see yet was that my role had already been defined. I thought I was helping. In reality, I was being placed. What made the Harper family difficult was not cruelty. It was politeness. Everything was said with a smile. Every remark sounded reasonable. Every decision was wrapped in calm language that made resistance feel unnecessary. My mother-in-law was especially skilled at this. She never raised her voice, never insulted me directly. Instead, she spoke in values, about humility, about knowing your place, about how money could distort people's judgment if they weren't careful. She said these things while looking at me kindly, as if she were worried for me. "You've had a comfortable life," she would say. "You wouldn't understand how we do things here." It was never an accusation. It was framed as protection. My sister-in-law was different. Her bitterness had sharper edges. After the divorce, she carried her resentment openly, not always at me, but it found its way there eventually. She compared us often, my stability, her uncertainty, my background, her struggle. She joked about it at first. Then the jokes became pointed. "It must be nice, Gordon," she said once, "to know money will always fix things." I laughed it off. I did not want to seem defensive. But underneath, something tightened. Because her tone wasn't admiration. It was resentment. She did not hate me. She hated what she thought I represented. And the family let it pass. No one corrected her. No one stepped in. They called it stress. They said she was fragile. They asked me to be patient. Ethan watched all of this quietly. He did not agree with them openly, but he did not challenge them either. When I tried to talk to him, he lowered his voice. "They don't mean it like that," he said. "Please don't make things harder." Harder for whom was never clear. Every time I asked a question, his answer was the same. "Let's not turn this into a problem." So I stopped asking. I told myself that peace mattered more than being right, that families needed compromise, that silence was sometimes a form of maturity. What I did not realize then was that my silence was being interpreted as consent. The more I stayed quiet, the more decisions were made without me. The more I adapted, the more comfortable they became. I was praised for being understanding, for not interfering, for trusting them, and slowly, that trust became expectation. I noticed how conversations shifted when I entered the room, how plans had already been finalized before I was informed, how phrases like "we've decided" appeared more often. One evening, it became explicit. I had asked a simple question about the flat. Nothing confrontational, just clarification. My mother-in-law looked at me gently and said, "This family decides things in its own way." The room went quiet. No one disagreed. No one added anything. It was presented as fact, not angry, not negotiable, just the way things were. I nodded, as I always did. But something changed then. Because in that sentence, I understood exactly where I stood. Not as a partner, not as an equal, but as someone outside the circle, invited in only when convenient. If you are listening to this and you recognize that moment when politeness becomes control, comment number 2 below, because this is where the line is first drawn. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. I did not lose my place in that family all at once. It happened slowly, quietly, through small moments that were easy to dismiss if you did not want to see them. I was rarely asked anymore. Decisions were made, plans were set, and then casually I was informed, not consulted, Not included. Just told. The roof would be repaired next month. The contractor had already been chosen. My sister-in-law would stay in the flat longer than planned. It made more sense that way. My father-in-law's treatment schedule had changed. The payments would increase slightly. All of this reached me the same way. Afterwards. Usually over tea. Sometimes in passing. Often with the assumption that I would simply nod. And I did. Because questioning felt awkward. Because challenging it felt unnecessary. Because everyone spoke so calmly that objecting felt dramatic. I noticed how language was used around me. Not, what do you think? But we've decided. Not, can you help? But this is how it will be. I was present. But I was no longer part of the process. The strange thing was that my money was still deeply involved. Transfers still came from my account. Standing orders still went out on time. Invoices still arrived addressed to me. Yet my role had shifted. I was no longer someone whose opinion mattered. I was simply the mechanism that made things possible. When I tried to re-enter conversations, it was subtly blocked. A pause, a smile, a sentence that moved things along without me. It's already sorted. There's no need to worry. We've handled it. Handled by whom was never explained. The more I observed, the clearer it became. Money did not give me influence here. It removed it. Because once they relied on it, they no longer felt the need to consider me. I remember one afternoon especially clearly. We were sitting at the dining table, paperwork spread out, numbers discussed freely. I asked a question, just one. Something small about timing, about whether a delay might help. My mother-in-law looked at me with genuine softness. She reached across the table, touched my hand lightly and said, "Your money is your money. Family matters are family matters." She did not mean it to hurt. That was what made it worse. No one reacted. No one shifted uncomfortably. No one defended me. It was accepted immediately, as if the distinction had always existed. As if it was obvious. In that moment, I understood the structure I had been placed into. I could contribute, but I could not decide. I could support, but I could not question. I could pay, but I could not belong. After that, the boundaries became clearer. I stopped being included in discussions, even informal ones. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Plans were already finalized by the time they reached me. And whenever I hesitated, whenever I slowed down even slightly, there was pressure. Not anger, not demands, just expectation. A look, a pause. A reminder of how much everyone was depending on things continuing as they were. I began to feel like I was funding a life I was not allowed to participate in. Like I was standing outside a house, keeping the lights on, while everyone else moved freely inside. And the most unsettling part was this. They truly believed they were being fair. In their minds, they were protecting family unity, maintaining tradition, keeping things simple. They did not see control. They saw order, and because it was delivered so gently, it took me longer than it should have to realize how much of myself I had already given up. But once I saw it, I could not unsee it. Because when your money is welcome but your voice is not, that is not generosity being accepted. That is power being taken. Looking back, the signs were there. Not obvious, not dramatic. Just small shifts in behavior that felt slightly off if you paid attention. The first time was a phone call I was not meant to hear. I had stepped out of the bedroom to grab a charger. The door was half open. Ethan was standing in the hallway with his phone pressed close to his ear. He did not see me at first. His voice was low, careful, different from how he spoke to me. "Yes," he said, "everything's fine now." "No, she doesn't know. We'll handle it." I froze, not because of the words themselves, but because of the ease with which he said them. This was not a conversation happening for the first time. This was continuation. I stepped back quietly. He never noticed. Later that evening, I asked him a simple question. "Who were you on the phone with?" He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. But I saw it. "My mum," he said. "Just family stuff." I nodded. I did not push. That became the pattern. Short answers. Avoided eye contact. Conversations that ended quickly when I entered the room. I started sending messages instead. Nothing confrontational. Just clarifying. "Do we need to talk about the flat? Has anything changed with the arrangements? Let me know when you have time." Every message was read, marked as seen. None were answered. At first, I told myself he was busy, that stress made people distant, that I was overthinking. But then I began to notice how easily he replied to others, messages from his sister, calls from his mother, group chats lighting up while my screen stayed silent. One evening, we were sitting together on the sofa. The television was on. Neither of us was really watching. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, smiled briefly, then locked the screen. I asked lightly, "Everything all right?" "Yes," he said too quickly. "Just sorting things out." Sorting what? And with whom? That question stayed with me. The more I observed, the clearer it became that information was being filtered, not shared, managed. I was no longer being kept informed. I was being kept comfortable. Then came the moment that removed all doubt. We were in the kitchen. I was rinsing a cup at the sink. Voices carried from the dining room. I heard my sister-in-law laugh. Then my mother-in-law spoke. "There's no issue," she said. "The flat should be in Claire's name anyway. It's more appropriate. She's family." Someone responded quietly. I could not hear who, but then the sentence landed fully. "The flat being under Claire's name makes sense. She's the family member." I stood very still. The water kept running. The sound covered my breath. They were talking about the flat I had paid for, the one I had bought as a temporary solution, the one I had never agreed to give away, and they were speaking as if the decision was already made. No mention of me, no consideration, no pause, just certainty. In that moment, everything aligned. The phone calls, the silence, the reassurances that never included details. This was not miscommunication. This was preparation. They were arranging a future that no longer required my involvement, only my contribution. I did not walk into the room. I did not interrupt. I finished rinsing the cup. I placed it upside down on the counter. And I walked away. Because I understood something important then. They were not hiding information to protect me. They were hiding it because they believed I had no claim to it. Not to the flat, not to the decisions, not even to the truth. If you're listening to this and you have ever felt that shift when conversations continue without you, when messages stop being answered, when clarity is replaced with reassurance, comment number 3 below. Because this is usually the moment before everything becomes undeniable. The moment it finally broke was not dramatic. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no door slammed shut. It happened in the middle of a normal afternoon, the kind of afternoon that is meant to feel safe, predictable, unremarkable. We were gathered in the living room, tea on the table, plates still warm from lunch, the quiet comfort of routine settling in. I stepped into the hallway to take a call. Nothing urgent, nothing important. When I returned, the conversation did not stop. It only changed volume, lower, careful, as if they assumed I was no longer close enough to hear. At first I caught fragments. My name. A pause. Then laughter. Then silence again. I stopped walking. Not because I was afraid to enter the room, but because something in me needed certainty. I did not want assumptions. I did not want interpretation. I needed to hear it clearly, exactly as it was being said. My sister-in-law spoke first. She thinks it's temporary, she said, as if people just move in and out of places like that. There was a short laugh, not cruel, not loud, comfortable. My mother-in-law replied, She doesn't need to know everything. It would only confuse her. Confuse me. That word stayed suspended in the air. Confuse suggested care, concern, protection. But underneath it was something else. Control. Then the sentence that ended any remaining doubt was spoken. We'll keep the flat. She won't take it back. She wouldn't do that to family. No one interrupted. No one questioned it. The way they said it was what struck me most. Not hopeful, not defensive, certain. As if ownership was already settled. As if my involvement had already been accounted for and dismissed. A cold sensation moved through me. Not anger, not shock. Recognition. They were no longer discussing possibilities. They were coordinating. Coordinating how to hold on to something that was not theirs. Coordinating a future that did not include my consent. For a brief moment, my body reacted before my thoughts did. My chest tightened. My breath shortened. My hands felt distant. I realized how carefully this had been done, how gradually I had been positioned at the edge, how naturally decisions had shifted away from me, how long these conversations must have been happening without my knowledge. Then came the second wave, slower, heavier, the understanding that this was not confusion. It was management. They did not think I would leave. They did not think I would object, because they believed they knew me. They believed I would stay quiet, stay generous, stay grateful for being included at all. They had assigned me a role, the one who pays, the one who helps, the one who does not interfere. I walked back into the room. No one stopped speaking. No one looked embarrassed. They smiled, asked if I wanted more tea, if I was comfortable. I said nothing. I sat down. I listened. The flat was mentioned again, casually, as something already secured. No one asked what I thought. No one checked my expression. It was as if my opinion no longer existed. That was when the truth fully settled. This was not about property. It was not about money. It was about removal. I had been written out of the family story without being told. Present when useful. Invisible when inconvenient. I looked at Ethan. He avoided my eyes. Not out of guilt, but out of preference. Silence was easier. Silence required nothing from him. And in that silence, something final locked into place. I was no longer part of this family. Not in any meaningful way. I was a resource, a convenience, a solution. And solutions are expected to function quietly. I did not react. I did not confront. I did not defend myself. Because reacting would have meant fighting for a place I no longer wanted. I finished my tea. I thanked them. I excused myself. My voice was steady. As I walked away, I felt something unexpected. Calm. Not because it hurt less, but because the truth had stopped shifting. It was no longer something I had to interpret or explain away. It was fixed, clear, undeniable. This was the moment I was erased. If you are listening to this and you recognize the feeling of being spoken about as if you are already gone, comment number 4 below, because once you reach this moment, nothing ever truly returns to what it was before. I locked the bathroom door behind me, not because I needed privacy, but because it was the only place where no one expected anything from me. The light was too bright at first. It reflected off the mirror, sharp and unforgiving. I turned it down slightly, stood still, let the room settle. My reflection looked exactly the same. Hair in place, face calm, no visible crack. That was the strange part. Inside, everything felt loose, unanchored, as if something essential had been lifted out without warning. I placed my hands on the sink, cold porcelain against my palms. I took a breath. It came out too fast. I tried again, slower this time. In, out. The sound of my breathing felt too loud in the quiet room. I focused on it, used it as an anchor. Outside the door I could still hear movement, muffled voices, a chair scraping, a cup being set down, life continuing. I watched myself in the mirror as if I were watching someone else, a woman standing very still, trying not to move in case everything collapsed at once. I waited for the reaction I thought would come, anger, tears, something dramatic. Nothing arrived. Instead, there was a heavy stillness, dense, pressing. My phone vibrated in my pocket, once, then again. I did not reach for it. I knew who it would be, or rather, I knew what it would represent. A question, an explanation, an attempt to smooth things over. I could not handle that yet. I placed the phone face down on the counter. As if that small action could create distance, the mirror caught the movement, marked it. I noticed how controlled my face still was, how carefully I had learned to hold myself together. I remembered every time I had done this before, every time I had swallowed a reaction, every time I had chosen calm over clarity. This moment felt like all of those moments lining up behind me. I leaned closer to the mirror, studied my own eyes. They looked tired. Not from today, from before, from months of adjusting, from years of making myself smaller in rooms where I had once felt welcome. Another vibration. I ignored it. I pressed my fingers into the edge of the sink, not hard enough to hurt, just enough to feel something solid. The room smelled faintly of soap, lavender, neutral, uninvolved. I breathed again, counted this time. 1, 2, 3. My chest loosened slightly, and then came the second wave, quieter, but deeper. The understanding that this was not a single moment. This was accumulation. Every ignored message, every decision made without me, every time my presence had been treated as optional, it all led here, to a bathroom, to a mirror, to a pause. My phone vibrated again, longer this time. I did not look, because looking would mean responding, and responding would mean explaining. I did not owe anyone clarity right now. I owed it to myself first. I straightened up, rolled my shoulders back slowly. The woman in the mirror followed. She looked composed, unmoved, but underneath something had shifted. Not broken, not repaired, shifted. I washed my hands, not because they were dirty, but because the movement helped. Water, warm, steady. I dried them carefully, folded the towel, everything deliberate. The phone vibrated once more, then stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise before it. I stayed where I was, counted my breaths again, in, out. This was not the moment to decide anything, not the moment to act. This was the moment to let the truth settle fully, to stop reacting, to stop negotiating with what I had seen. I did not tell myself what I would do next. I did not make promises. I simply stood there, in that small, enclosed space, allowing the stillness to do its work, because storms do not begin with thunder. They begin with air that stops moving, and this was that moment, the pause before everything changed. I did not leave the bathroom immediately. I stayed long enough for something to shift from emotion into focus. When I stepped back into the hallway, the house felt different, not hostile, not loud, just unfamiliar. I walked into the bedroom and closed the door, not to hide, but to separate. The first thing I did was place my personal phone on the bedside table, face down. Silent, that phone held conversations, memories, photos, messages that blurred emotion with obligation. I did not want that noise anymore. I reached for my work phone instead. It felt heavier in my hand, colder, more solid. That phone was for decisions, for contracts, for things that had consequences. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the difference register. Personal life on one side, professional clarity on the other. My heart was still beating fast, but my thoughts had slowed. This was the second wave, not shock, not grief, alignment. I opened my email, scrolled past unread messages without urgency, found the contact I needed, a solicitor in London. Someone who had handled property matters for my family before. Someone who spoke in timelines and clauses, not feelings. I hesitated for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I understood what this call would mean. Once I made it, there would be no pretending this was a misunderstanding. I pressed call. It rang twice. "Good afternoon," he answered. I heard my own voice respond, steady, even. "I need to confirm the terms of a property agreement." No explanation, no backstory, just facts. I described the flat, how it was purchased, how it was intended for temporary use, how the current occupants were acting beyond that scope. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked the question I expected. "Is the property solely in your name?" "Yes." "Are there written terms regarding occupancy?" "Yes." "Are those terms being breached?" "Yes." There was a brief pause. "Then your position is clear," he said. "You retain control." Clear. That word landed differently now, not as reassurance, but as confirmation. We spoke about mechanisms, about notices, about timing. Everything was procedural, neutral, unemotional. Exactly what I needed. When the call ended, I sat still for a moment. I noticed something surprising. I was not shaking. My hands were steady. The tightness in my chest had eased, not because the situation had improved, but because it had become defined. Clarity does that. I picked up my personal phone, saw missed calls, messages waiting. I did not open them. Not yet. I placed the phone back down. This was not avoidance. It was prioritization. For too long I had responded first and thought later, smoothed things over, absorbed discomfort to keep peace. That pattern ended here. I opened a document on my laptop, noted dates, saved copies of agreements, screenshots, timelines. I was not preparing for a fight. I was preparing for order. As I worked, I felt the shift complete itself. The part of me that had been waiting for permission went quiet. The part that acted without apology stepped forward. I was not angry. That was the most unexpected part. Anger is loud, messy, reactive. This felt different. I was calm, focused. I knew what had happened. I knew what was mine. I knew what I would no longer allow. And that knowledge did not need emotion to support it. I'm not angry, I thought. I'm just clear. That was the moment control returned. Not in a dramatic way, not with a declaration, but with a series of deliberate choices. What to respond to, what to ignore, what to protect. Outside the room, the house continued as before. Voices, movement, assumptions. They did not know anything had changed. That was fine. Control does not announce itself. It simply stops asking. If you are listening to this and you recognize the moment when emotion gives way to clarity, when you stop explaining and start deciding, comment number 5 below. Because once that switch happens, there is no going back to who you were before. Money was never the loudest part of my life. It had always moved quietly, in the background, doing its job without needing attention. So when I decided to act, I did it the same way, quietly. I did not announce anything. I did not warn anyone. I did not explain, because money does not need permission to move. It only needs instruction. I began by reading the agreement again, slowly, line by line. The flat had been purchased under my name. The terms were clear. Temporary occupancy. No transfer of ownership. No permanent residency. No alterations without written approval. At the time, those clauses had felt excessive. A formality. Something my solicitor insisted on, just in case. Now they felt precise. I sent one email, not emotional, not long. Just a request to activate the management clause under temporary ownership conditions. The reply came the next morning. Acknowledged, understood, actionable. From that moment on, things began to shift. The building management was informed. Access permissions were reviewed. Occupancy terms were adjusted. Nothing dramatic. No one was evicted. No locks were changed overnight. Control was simply restored to where it had always legally belonged. The flat entered a different status. Still standing, still furnished, still available, but no longer assumed. I watched the process unfold through confirmations and timestamps, emails marked completed, files updated, authorizations limited. It felt almost anticlimactic. Years of assumption undone by a few procedural steps. What struck me most was how little effort it took. Not because the situation was simple, but because it had always been mine to resolve. I realized how much power had been given away simply because I had not believed I would ever need to take it back. There was no confrontation, no conversation. Life in the house continued as usual. Meals were shared, plans were discussed, laughter came and went. No one suspected anything. They spoke freely about the flat, about decorating, about how long Claire might stay, about making it feel permanent. I listened. I said nothing, because they still believed the story they had written, that the flat was theirs now, that my role had ended at payment. They did not know the terms had changed. They did not know access had been redefined. They did not know the ground beneath them had shifted. That was the mini-shock. They still thought the flat belonged to them. I checked my phone often, not for messages from them, but for confirmations from the management company. Each one was another quiet click into place. I felt no rush, no satisfaction, only steadiness. This was not revenge. It was correction, the return of balance. I thought about how easily they had spoken of keeping what was not theirs, how confidently they had planned around my silence, how certain they were that generosity meant surrender. They had mistaken kindness for weakness and silence for consent. I remembered the conversations, the reassurances, the phrases repeated gently enough to feel harmless. You wouldn't do that to family. She wouldn't take it back. They had said those things because they believed I would protect their comfort over my boundaries. They believed I would absorb loss quietly to preserve peace. What they did not understand was that peace without agency is not peace. It is erasure. I did not tell Ethan what I had done, not because I was hiding it, but because there was nothing to explain. This was not a discussion. It was an adjustment. I continued my days normally, work, emails, routine. At home, I remained polite, present, neutral. If anything, I became quieter, not withdrawn, just selective. I watched how often money came up, how casually expenses were mentioned, how confidently plans were made. All of it rested on an assumption, that the foundation beneath them was secure. They did not know the structure had changed. They did not know the safety net had been tightened. They did not know that access was now conditional. That knowledge belonged only to me, and that was enough. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I felt aligned. For the first time in a long while, my actions matched my reality. I was no longer funding decisions I could not influence, no longer supporting outcomes I did not agree with, no longer pretending that generosity required silence. The flat remained. So did the family's confidence. For now. Because the first impact of financial control is not noise, it is delay. And delay is where reality begins to surface. They would find out, not from me, but from the world responding differently to their expectations. That was the point. I did not need them to know yet. I only needed the system to remember who it answered to. They still believed the flat was theirs, and that belief was about to become very expensive. They arrived in good spirits. The journey had been long, but no one complained. The car was full. Music played softly. Bottles of wine clinked in the boot. This was meant to be a celebration. A weekend by the coast, fresh air, a break from routine. They walked into the building together, talking over one another, laughing, already deciding who would sleep where. Claire was the most animated. She spoke about curtains, about plants for the balcony, about how the light would look in the mornings. "This place feels like home already," she said. No one corrected her. They poured drinks, sat around the table, opened the windows to let the sea air in. The flat looked exactly as it always had. Clean, bright, inviting. Nothing warned them. They toasted, they laughed, they spoke about the future as if it were settled, about how long they would stay, about guests they might invite, about how convenient it was not to worry about rent. Someone mentioned my name, briefly, casually. "She won't mind," my mother-in-law said. "She understands." The conversation moved on. Time passed, glasses were refilled, the afternoon slipped into early evening. That was when the doorbell rang. At first, no one moved. They were not expecting anyone. They had everything they needed. Then it rang again. Claire stood up, still smiling. "I'll get it," she said. She opened the door without hesitation. Two people stood in the hallway, professional, neutral, holding folders. "Good afternoon," one of them said. "We're here regarding the property." The smile on Claire's face faltered. "Oh," she replied. "Is there a problem?" They were invited inside, offered seats, offered drinks. They declined politely. "We won't take long," the woman said. "We just need to clarify the current status of this flat." The room grew quieter. My father-in-law leaned forward. "There must be some mistake," he said. "We're family." The woman opened her folder. "This property is currently under temporary occupancy conditions," she said. "The owner has requested that those conditions be enforced." The word owner landed heavily. Claire laughed. A short, nervous sound. "That can't be right," she said. "This is our flat." The man shook his head. "No," he replied. "You do not hold ownership rights here." Silence spread across the room. My mother-in-law stood up. "We've been staying here with permission," she said. "There's no issue." "There is," the woman replied calmly. "The terms have been reviewed." She listed them. Clear, specific, temporary use, no permanence, revocable access. Each word stripped away an assumption. My husband raised his voice. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You can't just turn up and say this." The man met his gaze. "We're not turning up," he said. "We're responding." Claire's face had changed colour. "So what are you saying?" she asked. The woman closed the folder. "We're asking you to vacate the property," she said. "Arrangements will be made for collection of personal items." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the room erupted. Questions, accusations, raised voices. My mother-in-law demanded explanations. My father-in-law insisted there must be a call they could make. Someone mentioned my name again, louder this time. "She wouldn't do this," Claire said. "She wouldn't." But the representatives did not react to that. They stood calmly, unmoved. "We'll give you time to gather essentials," the woman said, "but the property will need to be cleared." Glasses were left untouched. The wine no longer mattered. The sea air felt colder now. Claire began pacing. My mother-in-law sat down abruptly. My husband ran a hand through his hair, muttering. Neighbours' doors opened briefly. Curious glances were exchanged in the hallway. This was no longer private. The representatives waited. They did not argue. They did not explain beyond what was required. They simply stood there, holding reality in their hands. My father-in-law finally asked, "Who asked for this?" The woman answered without hesitation, "The owner." There was nothing else to say. They packed in silence. Bags were filled hastily. Items were left behind. No one knew what was allowed. No one knew what came next. The flat no longer felt like theirs. It felt borrowed, exposed. When they left, the door closed softly behind them. No shouting, no final words. Just the sound of footsteps fading down the corridor. They stood outside the building for a long moment, confused, embarrassed, publicly undone. This was the collapse, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. And the most important thing was this: I was not there. I did not watch it happen. I did not witness their faces. I did not hear their voices break, because this was never about confrontation. It was about consequence. If listening to this part brought you a sense of quiet satisfaction, if you felt the balance finally shift, take a moment to like this video, because what comes next is not louder, it is final. The first thing that arrived was not an argument, it was an email, quiet, automatic, unemotional, a reminder about a payment date, then another, and another. Bills do not announce themselves, they simply appear. At first, they tried to manage it quietly, the way they always had when money was assumed to be handled somewhere else. A bill here, a direct debit there, a quick reshuffle of priorities. But what had changed was not the amount, it was the absence. For years there had been a silent understanding. Things were covered. Problems were absorbed before they became visible. Medical appointments, monthly payments, unexpected expenses. They had never been urgent, because someone else had made sure they were not. Now there was no one doing that. The mortgage reminder came next. Polite, firm, unavoidable. A date, a figure. A line that said what would happen if nothing was done. They discussed it over breakfast. Lower voices, fewer jokes. Someone suggested calling the bank. Someone else said it would be fine. That it was probably just a delay. Delays add up. The hospital invoice followed. Routine treatment, nothing dramatic, nothing optional. It had always been handled, scheduled, paid. This time it sat unopened on the counter for a day, then two. When it was finally opened, the room went quiet. No one knew who was meant to take care of it now. There were calls, not angry ones, anxious ones, calls to clarify dates, to ask for extensions, to negotiate. Reality does not negotiate easily. They started counting, not loosely, not in estimates, precisely. What came in, what went out, what had been assumed. They realized how much had been normalized, how many comforts had been built on the idea that money was not something they needed to think about. They had thought generosity was permanent, that support was a feature, not a choice. Now choice had returned. And it was not on their side. The tone in the house shifted. Conversations became shorter. Plans were postponed. Small purchases were questioned. Claire stopped talking about redecorating. My mother-in-law began mentioning prices, not casually, but carefully. My husband grew quieter. He checked his phone more often, avoided certain topics. There was no single moment of collapse, just accumulation. A letter from the lender, a follow-up from the clinic, a notice about a missed payment window. None of it was dramatic. That was what made it heavy. This was not punishment. It was gravity, things falling when the support beneath them was gone. They spoke about fairness, about how unexpected everything felt, about how things should not have changed so quickly. But nothing had changed quickly. It had simply stopped being hidden. They considered selling something, then realized it would not cover much. They considered borrowing, then realized from whom. There were no easy solutions, only adjustments. They blamed timing, stress, miscommunication. They did not blame themselves. They never do. What they did not say out loud was the truth sitting between them. That life had been easier when someone else absorbed the weight, and that someone was no longer there. I did not remind them. I did not point anything out, because this was not something that needed explaining. Bills explain themselves. They come with dates, with numbers, with consequences that do not care about intentions. There were no raised voices, no accusations directed at me, just discomfort. The kind that grows slowly, that seeps into routines, that changes how people move through their day. Appointments were rescheduled, treatments were reconsidered, Expenses were prioritized. Comfort gave way to calculation. This was the reality phase, where assumptions meet limits, where absence becomes measurable. I was not cruel. I did not withdraw support publicly. I simply stopped compensating. There is a difference. I continued my life, work, meetings, evenings that ended quietly. I did not check in. I did not intervene. Not because I wanted them to struggle, but because struggle reveals truth. It shows what was sustainable and what was never meant to be. They began to understand the scale of what had been carried for them, not all at once, but in increments, a missed payment, a delayed appointment, a conversation that ended with uncertainty instead of reassurance. This was not revenge. It was exposure. The exposure of a system that only functioned because someone else stood underneath it. And now that support was gone. If listening to this part made you feel that familiar weight, that sense of reality pressing down where entitlement once lived, take a moment to like this video. Because consequences do not shout, they arrive, they stay, and they teach. And this lesson was far from over. The call came late. Later than any reasonable conversation, late enough to tell me it was not about connection, it was about panic. I was at my desk, laptop open, lights low. I saw his name on the screen and did not answer straight away, not out of spite, out of instinct. When I did answer, he spoke before I could say anything, fast, unsteady, as if words were falling over each other. "There's been a mistake," he said. "You need to talk to someone." "They can't do this." I listened. He told me about the flat, about the visit, about being asked to leave. He talked about bills, about pressure, about how everything was happening at once. He spoke as if the world had suddenly turned against him. I said nothing. Silence stretched between us. He kept going. "This has gone too far," he said. "They're embarrassed. They're scared. You know they didn't mean it like that." I recognized the pattern. Urgency dressed as explanation. Fear disguised as reason. He asked if we could meet, if we could talk, if I could just help him fix it. I let him finish. Then I said the only sentence I had prepared. "I'm not ending the marriage because of the flat," I said. "I'm ending it because I no longer trust you." The line went quiet, not immediately, but slowly, like someone realizing there was no next argument to reach for. He tried again. "You're being unfair," he said. "You're overreacting." I did not respond. He asked what I wanted, what this meant, how long this would last. I answered in practical terms. "We'll be separating," I said. "I'll have my solicitor contact yours." There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line. "This isn't necessary," he said. "We can work through this." I did not explain, because explanations invite negotiation, and this was not negotiable. I told him where to send correspondence. I told him what would happen next. Dates, process, boundaries. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, I did not feel relief. I felt completion. The kind that comes when a decision has already been made internally and words are simply catching up. I did not cry. I did not pace. I did not call anyone. I sat where I was, let the quiet settle. For a long time, my life had been shaped by adjustment, by making room, by absorbing tension so others would not have to. That chapter closed without ceremony. There was no dramatic declaration, no final confrontation, just a clear line drawn where trust had been. The next day I contacted my solicitor, not in anger, not in haste, in sequence. We discussed separation, assets, timelines. Everything was calm, orderly. The marriage was ending not with chaos, but with structure. That mattered to me, because I was not leaving in pieces. I was leaving whole. I thought about how quickly roles had reversed, how silence had once been my burden, and now it was my protection. He sent messages later, apologies, explanations, promises. I did not reply. not because I wanted to punish him, but because my answer had already been given. Trust does not erode loudly. It fades when someone watches you be erased and says nothing. This was not about money, or property, or pressure. It was about choosing not to stand beside me when it mattered. And that choice had consequences. Ending the marriage was not an act of anger. It was an act of alignment between what I had seen and what I was no longer willing to accept. When the legal paperwork began, it felt almost secondary, formal, expected. The real ending had already happened in that phone call, with one sentence, clear, final. And for the first time in a long while, I did not feel like I was walking away from something. I felt like I was walking back to myself. We met once, not to reconcile, not to negotiate, to close a door that had already been shut. It was his idea. He asked if we could talk, said there were things he needed to say. I agreed, because endings deserve witnesses. We sat across from each other, a small table, neutral space, no history in the walls. He looked tired, not broken, just worn down by consequences. He started first. This didn't have to go this far, he said. I did not respond. He shifted in his chair, tried again. They didn't mean to hurt you. I stayed quiet. Silence does something to people who are used to being answered. It got out of hand, he said. You know how my family is. I looked at him, not with anger, not with disappointment, with clarity. That's exactly how I know, I said. He paused, as if waiting for more. None came. He leaned forward. You could have told me, he said. You could have warned us. I shook my head once. No, I said, I shouldn't have had to. The words landed, clean, unpadded. He sighed. They're struggling, he said, with the bills. With everything. I nodded, once. I know. That surprised him. If you know, he said, then why not help? I met his eyes. Because help without respect is just funding, I said. He opened his mouth, closed it again. He tried a different angle. You've changed, he said. Yes, I replied. No defense, no explanation, just acknowledgement. He looked around the room, as if searching for support. There were good moments, he said. We were happy. For a while, I said. He flinched slightly. You're acting like we meant nothing. I shook my head again. That's not what this is, I said. This is about what you chose to ignore. He frowned. I didn't choose this, he said. You chose silence, I replied. That stopped him. Silence sat between us, heavy, unavoidable. He straightened. So that's it, he said. You walk away and leave everything behind. I leaned back. I didn't walk away, I said. I stepped out of something that no longer existed. He laughed, short, bitter. You're punishing us, he said. I did not rise to it. No, I said. I stopped compensating. There was a difference, and he could feel it. He looked down at his hands. They're embarrassed, he said. People are talking. I nodded again. I know. Another pause. He looked up. Is there anything I can say? He asked. I considered the question. Not emotionally, practically. No, I said. The word was calm. Final. He sat back. Exhaled. You really don't care anymore, he said. I met his gaze one last time. I care about what's real, I said, and this isn't. He stood, slowly. This isn't how I thought it would end, he said. Neither did I replied. We gathered our things. At the door he turned. You took everything, he said. I stopped, looked at him, and then I said the final sentence, the one that needed to exist. You didn't lose the house, I said. You lost access to my trust. He said nothing after that. There was nothing left to say. If you're listening to this, and that sentence landed the way it should have, comment number 6 below. Because sometimes the strongest confrontations end not with shouting, but with clarity that cannot be undone. After everything settled, there was no explosion, no final argument, no dramatic fallout, just a quiet unraveling. It did not happen all at once. It never does. It happened in the small spaces between days, in conversations that no longer flowed, in silences that lingered too long. The family did not fall apart publicly. They simply stopped holding together. Without a shared target, old tensions surfaced. Things that had once been smoothed over by convenience now had nowhere to go. They began to notice each other differently. My mother-in-law grew sharper, not louder, sharper. Every decision was questioned. Every expense weighed. What used to be gratitude turned into calculation. Claire became defensive, quick to justify, quick to explain. She spoke often about how unfair everything was, about how quickly things had changed, but no one interrupted her anymore. No one reassured her. They were too busy managing their own worries. My father-in-law withdrew, spent more time alone, stopped offering opinions. He had always relied on structure, on stability provided quietly by someone else. Now, without that buffer, he seemed unsure where to place himself. My husband moved between them, trying to keep peace, trying to repair what could no longer be fixed. He listened more than he spoke, because speaking meant choosing sides, and choosing sides meant consequences. The conversations that once revolved around plans shifted to problems, bills, appointments, what could wait, what could not. No one offered solutions anymore, only observations. They began to see each other clearly, without the softening effect of shared benefit. It was uncomfortable. There were moments when someone would almost say my name, almost suggest reaching out. But the moment passed, not because they respected my boundary, but because they understood something had changed. Support was no longer automatic. Forgiveness was no longer assumed. They had learned that absence carries weight, not as punishment, as truth. Without a single confrontation, roles recalibrated. No one stepped in to fill the gap, because no one could. The family dynamic had depended on an invisible pillar. Once removed, the shape of things shifted. People adapted, poorly at first. There were arguments, quiet ones, behind closed doors. Blame moved sideways, never landing anywhere long enough to resolve. This was the consequence phase, not loud, not theatrical, but complete. I heard about these things indirectly, through neutral updates, through third parties. I did not respond, not because I was avoiding responsibility, but because there was none left to take. They were not being punished. They were living with the reality of what had always been true, that their system worked because someone else absorbed its flaws. Now that person was gone. No one replaced her, and no one apologized either, because apology would have required acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would have required humility. They chose adjustment instead. Over time, conversations became transactional. Support was conditional. Affection measured. The warmth that once existed was revealed to have been situational. It had thrived under comfort. It shrank under strain. That was not my doing. That was exposure. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel regretful. I felt distant, not emotionally, but structurally, like someone who has moved houses and no longer feels the floorboards of the old one beneath their feet. I thought about how easily people confuse generosity with obligation, how quickly kindness is rewritten as entitlement. They had learned the difference now, not through lectures, not through confrontation, but through experience. Each missed ease, each delayed reassurance, each problem handled alone. This was karma, if such a thing exists, not as punishment, but as balance. The return of weight to the places it belonged. I did not gain anything from this phase, except clarity. Clarity about what had been sustainable and what had never been fair. The family did not collapse entirely. They simply became what they were without external support. Smaller, more careful, less generous, more honest. That honesty was not comfortable, but it was real. And reality has a way of settling into place once illusions are removed. There were no winners here, only outcomes. No one was saved. No one was destroyed. They lived with what remained. And I lived without what had drained me. That was the arc. Not a triumph, not a tragedy, just consequence unfolding at its own pace. If listening to this part left you feeling full, not excited but settled, then the story has done what it needed to do. Because sometimes the most powerful endings are the ones that do not ask for applause, they ask for understanding. I went somewhere else. Not the coast they loved, not the place filled with memories I had already closed. A different stretch of sea. Quieter, less familiar. I arrived early, before the crowds, before the noise. The sky was pale, the water calm. The kind of morning that does not ask questions. I walked slowly, no destination, no urgency. For the first time in a long while, I noticed how light my body felt. Not happy, not excited, just unburdened. I sat on a low wall near the shore and watched the tide move in and out. It did not rush, it did not hesitate, it simply followed its own rhythm. I thought about how much energy I had spent holding things together, managing moods, smoothing edges, making sure everyone else felt comfortable. I had mistaken that effort for love, for responsibility, for belonging. Standing there with nothing to manage, I realized how quiet my mind had become. There was no list running in the background, no problem waiting to be solved, no role to step back into. The sea did not know me, and it did not need to. That felt like freedom. I took off my shoes and let my feet touch the sand. Cold, solid, real. Every step grounded me further in the present. I was not replaying conversations. I was not rewriting outcomes. Those things had already ended. What remained was space. Space to breathe without explaining, to exist without being useful, to move without permission. I thought about what I had lost, the house, the family, the version of myself that tried to make everything work. And then I realized something gently. I did not want those things back. Not the way they had been. Freedom, I understood then, was not about reclaiming what had been taken. It was about no longer needing it. The sea did not care about fairness, or apologies, or closure. It simply existed. I stayed there for a long time, long enough for the weight of the past to loosen its grip. When I stood up to leave, there was no dramatic turning point, just a quiet certainty. I was not going back to fix anything. I was not waiting for an apology that would never come. I was moving forward, carrying only what was mine. Peace, clarity, and the knowledge that my life no longer depended on being accepted. As I walked away from the shore, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Lightness, not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was being forced. If you are listening to this right now, take a moment. Where are you listening from? A city? A quiet room? Another coast? Wherever you are, I hope this ending meets you gently, because sometimes the bravest thing we do is choose not to return to what no longer needs us.